Imagine walking through the heart of the Gobi Desert. The sun is a white hammer. There is no water for 1,000 miles. Then you see it. A massive steel hull of an ocean liner. It isn't a mirage. The metal is real. The rivets are visible. The propeller is half buried in a sand dune. According to official geology, this area hasn't seen an ocean for 50 million years. This is a scientific impossibility. Steel does not survive for 50 million years in the open air. It oxidizes. It turns to dust in a few centuries. Yet here is a ship from the 19th century resting where an ocean should not be. Our history books are missing a massive geographical event. We are told the Earth changes over eons. We are told the deserts are ancient. The evidence says something else. It says the water was here recently. It says the maps we call fantasy were actually accurate records. We are looking at a planetary heist. Someone stole the water, and they did it while we were already building steamships. Chapter 1: The Physics of the Lie. Official history relies on the concept of deep time. If a desert exists, it must have been there for millions of years. This theory falls apart the moment you touch the metal. In the 1980s, explorers in the Sahara found remains of ships and even small harbor structures. They were not fossilized. They were made of wood and iron. Think about the life of an object. A car left in a field is a heap of rust in 80 years. A wooden boat in the sun rots in 50. If these ships were millions of years old, they would be gone. There wouldn't even be an outline in the sand. But they are there. The wood is scorched by the sun but intact. The iron is pitted but solid. This means the water left recently. Geologists claim the Aral Sea is the only recent example of a vanishing body of water. They call it a man-made disaster of the 20th century. But look at the Gobi. Look at the Taklamakan. These are massive basins that look exactly like dried-up seabeds. The salt levels on the surface are too high. If the water vanished millions of years ago, the salt would be deep underground, washed away by millennia of rain and wind. Instead, the salt is on top. You can pick it up with your hands. It's fresh. The chance of salt remaining on the surface for millions of years is zero. The chance of a 19th century ship appearing in a 50-million-year-old desert by accident is 1 in a billion. We are being lied to about the age of our landscape. Chapter 2: The Maps of the Living Ocean. Let's look at the maps. This is where the official narrative breaks completely. In 1570, Abraham Ortelius published the Theatrum Orbis Terrarum. It was the first modern atlas. Look at the area of modern Russia and China. There is a massive inland sea. It's not a small lake. It's a body of water the size of the Mediterranean. Historians say Ortelius was guessing. They say he was filling in blank spots with imagination. That is a logical trap. Navigation in the 16th and 17th centuries was a matter of life and death. If a cartographer put a sea where there was a mountain, ships would crash. People would die. Fortunes would be lost. Cartography was the most expensive and precise science of the era. By 1700, the maps of Guillaume de Lisle show the same thing. The Caspian Sea is shaped differently. It extends much further north. It connects to the Aral Sea. There are port cities listed on the banks of rivers that today are nothing but dry canyons in the desert. We have the names of these cities. We have records of trade routes. Then, we hit the year 1880. Suddenly, the maps change. The inland seas disappear. The rivers vanish. The port cities are removed from the legends. The Great Gobi Desert appears in the place of a thriving maritime region. Imagine humanity forgot how to build computers for 1,500 years. Now imagine humanity forgot an entire ocean existed just 150 years ago. That is the scale of the anomaly. Chapter 3: The Port Cities of Nowhere. In the middle of the desert, we find ruins that don't make sense. They aren't nomadic camps. They are stone foundations of large buildings with docks. In the Lampner region of China, there are structures that look exactly like 18th century piers. There is no water for hundreds of miles. The official explanation? Climate change over thousands of years. This doesn't fit the architecture. These buildings were constructed using techniques that only appeared in the last few hundred years. We find iron rings for mooring ships embedded in rocks that are now in the middle of sandstorms. If you build a pier, you build it where the water is. You don't build a pier in the sand and hope the water arrives in a million years. The existence of these piers proves the water was there at the time of construction. If the construction style is from the 1700s, the water was there in the 1700s. Write in the comments, do you believe a mapmaker from the 17th century would draw 1,000-mile sea just for fun? Or are we looking at a reality our ancestors lived in, but we are forbidden to remember? Chapter 4: The Sahara's Secret Rivers. The Sahara is the most famous desert on Earth. We are told it has been a wasteland for at least 5,000 years. But in 2015, satellite radar imaging revealed something terrifying for mainstream historians. Under the sand of the Sahara lies a massive, buried river system. These aren't small streams. These are rivers as wide as the Nile. The radar shows the paths of these rivers are clear. They haven't been eroded by millions of years of tectonic shift. They are preserved. More importantly, we have maps from the 1600s, like the ones by Mercator, showing the Sahara as a green region with lakes and cities. Official science says the Green Sahara ended 5,000 years ago. If that's true, how did 17th-century explorers know exactly where the rivers were buried? How did they draw the Lake Triton system in North Africa with such precision that modern satellites are just now confirming the locations? They didn't have radar in 1650. They had eyes. They drew what they saw. They saw water. They saw ships. They saw a world that looked nothing like the one we see on Google Earth today. The speed of this transformation is the key. It wasn't a slow drying process. It was a sudden disappearance. Chapter 5: The Whale in the Sands. If the water left millions of years ago, the biological evidence should be buried under kilometers of sediment. That is how geology works. Layers pile up. The deeper it is, the older it is. But in the Wadi al-Haytham, the Valley of the Whales, in Egypt, the skeletons are just sitting there. You can walk up to a 50-foot whale skeleton resting on the surface of the sand. Some are partially covered, but many are exposed. The official story? Wind erosion uncovered them. This is a convenient excuse used for every anomaly. Think about the probability. For wind to perfectly strip away 40 million years of rock and dirt just to expose a whale skeleton, without destroying the skeleton itself, is a statistical miracle. It's more likely the whale died there recently. It's more likely that the sea it swam in was there just a few centuries ago. When the water vanished, the whales were stranded. They died on the sand, and the sand has stayed there ever since. There is something even more disturbing. In some of these desert shipwrecks, explorers have found remains of rope and sailcloth. Organic fibers like hemp and cotton have a lifespan. Even in a dry desert, they don't last 10,000 years. They certainly don't last millions. Finding a piece of rope on a ship in the middle of the Gobi means that ship was sailing in the modern era. Chapter 6: The 1880 Flashpoint. Why does the year 1880 keep appearing in the data? If you look at the sea level records and the cartographic shifts, there is a massive reset at the end of the 19th century. Before 1880, maps are chaotic but consistent about large inland bodies of water. After 1880, the maps become the standardized versions we use today. This is the period when the Great Surveys happened. The British, the Russians, and the Americans all started remapping the world at the same time. They weren't just mapping new territory. They were documenting a new reality. They were fixing the maps because the old ones no longer matched the ground. The water was gone. The cities were ruins. The ships were stuck in the mud. Imagine a week where the sea level drops globally by 50 meters. Or a week where a massive tectonic shift opens a fissure that drains an entire inland sea into the subterranean oceans. This sounds like science fiction. But the physical evidence, the ships, the salt, the fresh ruins, points to a catastrophic drainage event. We are told that the Earth is a closed system and that water just cycles through evaporation. But what if the water can leave? What if the basins of the Gobi and the Sahara were drained like a bathtub? Look at the Eye of the Sahara, the Rick hat structure. It looks like a massive drain hole. Mainstream science calls it an eroded dome. But look at the flow patterns around it. It looks like a place where an enormous amount of water swirled and exited the surface. You were told that geography is a slow, boring process of millions of years. You were wrong. What I will show you next will flip your understanding of how the continents actually work. Chapter 7: The Vanishing Port of Lake Lop Nur. In Central Asia, there was a lake called Lop Nur. On old maps, it is a giant. It is the Sea of Sin. Today, it is a salt crust where China tests nuclear weapons. It is one of the most desolate places on the planet. In the early 20th century, explorers like Sven Hedin went there. They found something that shouldn't exist. They found rows of abandoned houses and the remains of a wandering lake. Hedin noticed that the lake seemed to move and disappear in cycles. But he also found something he couldn't explain. He found artifacts from the 18th century mixed with the remains of a maritime culture. People were fishing here just before the Great Drying. The official timeline says this area became a desert thousands of years ago. Hedin found evidence it was a flourishing wetland in the 1700s. We are talking about a total ecosystem collapse in less than 200 years. If a lake the size of a small country can vanish and be replaced by a nuclear testing ground in 2 centuries, what happened to the rest of the world's water? Chapter 8: The Great Drainage. If you take a globe and look at the mountain ranges, you see something strange. Many of them look like they were carved by rushing water, not by slow wind. There are giant ripple marks in the deserts of Washington state and the deserts of Tartary. These ripples are hundreds of feet high. You can only see them from a plane. They are identical to the ripples you see in the sand at the beach when the tide goes out. Except these are made of stone and giant boulders. To create ripples this size, you need a wall of water a mile high moving at 60 miles per hour. This isn't a slow leak. This is a planetary discharge. Where did that water go? If it moved across the continents, it would have swept ships from the oceans and dumped them in the middle of the land. It would have filled the basins of the Gobi and the Sahara, and then, as the earth shifted, that water would have drained away, leaving the ships stranded in the mud. As the mud dried into sand, the ships remained on the surface. This is why we find them today. Not because they were built in the desert, but because they were carried there by a force we are no longer allowed to discuss. Chapter 9: The Silence of the 19th Century. Think about the mid-1800s. It was a time of great exhibitions and world fairs. It was also a time of massive, unexplained mud floods in cities, but we aren't talking about that today. We are talking about the water. In the mid-1800s, there was a global obsession with reclamation. Governments were suddenly obsessed with finding new sources of water and mapping the deserts. Why? Because the old sources had vanished. The ocean that vanished in 1 week isn't just a catchy title. It's a hypothesis for a geological event that occurred around 1880. A shift that caused the inland seas of the northern hemisphere to drain into the oceans or into the crust. This left the world's climate in a shock. The green Sahara turned to dust. The Gobi Sea became a wasteland. The civilizations that lived on those shores either died or moved. This is why we have lost cities in the desert. They aren't thousands of years old. They are the homes of your ancestors from 5 generations ago. They didn't leave because of a slow drought. They left because the sea disappeared overnight. Imagine waking up in a port city and the ocean is 10 miles away. Then 50 miles. Then 100. The ships are tilted in the mud. The fish are rotting in the sun. You have no choice but to walk. Chapter 10: The Evidence in the Cargo. In 1890, a group of travelers in the Western Sahara reported seeing the mast of a ship sticking out of a dune. When they dug down, they didn't find ancient Roman oars. They found a modern hull. There are rumors of sand ships being found with cargo still inside. Not gold and spices, but industrial goods. Crates of glass. Machine parts. This is the smoking gun. If a ship in the middle of a million-year-old desert is carrying 19th-century industrial cargo, the desert is not a million years old. The probability of this being a hoax is low. These finds are often reported by military pilots or oil surveyors, people who have no interest in alternative history. They see something, they report it, and then the official archaeologists arrive and the story disappears. Why hide it? Because if the geography of the Earth can change that fast, our entire understanding of stability is a lie. If an ocean can vanish in a week, your city isn't safe. Your history isn't solid. The deep time narrative is a security blanket to make you feel like the world is permanent. But the ships in the sand are screaming the truth. The world is volatile. The maps were right. The history books are wrong. We have found the ships. We have found the maps. We have found the salt. Now, we need to find the cause. What could move that much water in such a short time? In the next part, we will look at the Great Drain theory. We will examine the evidence of massive subterranean openings found by early polar explorers. We will look at the records of 1880, the year the sun stayed dark and the oceans moved. You think the ground beneath your feet is solid? Wait until you see what's moving underneath it. The ships are just the beginning. The real mystery is where the water went, and if it's coming back. Chapter 1: The Abyss Below. Official science says oceans take millions of years to recede. The ships in the Gobi Desert prove this is a lie. If the water vanished slowly, the ships would have been dismantled for wood or moved. They weren't. They were abandoned exactly where they floated. This suggests the water didn't evaporate. It drained. Modern geology recently admitted a shocking fact. There is a massive reservoir of water trapped in the Earth's mantle, 400 miles beneath our feet. They call it ringwoodite. This mineral acts like a sponge, holding 3 times the volume of all surface oceans combined. The plumbing for a global catastrophe already exists. The drain is real. Imagine a bathtub. When you pull the plug, the water doesn't disappear into thin air. It moves to a lower level. In 1880, something pulled the plug on the inland seas of Africa and Asia. The probability of this happening by natural evaporation is 0. To dry out a sea the size of the Aral or the Caspian in a week, you would need temperatures that would melt lead. But the ships are intact. The wood isn't charred. The only logical conclusion is a subterranean shift. A crack in the crust. A literal drain into the deep earth. Chapter 2: The 1880 Event. Records from the year 1880 are full of anomalies. This was the decade of the Krakatoa eruption, the loudest sound ever recorded. The Earth's crust was ringing like a bell. Seismic data from that era shows a massive redistribution of weight across the tectonic plates. In the middle of 1880, maritime logs from the Atlantic and Pacific reported something impossible. Sea levels in the open ocean rose by several feet in a matter of days, while inland lakes in Africa disappeared. This is a hydrobalance shift. Look at the maps of the French explorer Henri de Verrier. In the late 19th century, his surveys of the Sahara depicted massive water systems and marshy regions that today are nothing but bone-dry dunes. He wasn't hallucinating. He was recording the final days of an African ocean. One week there was a trade route by boat. The next week, the boats were sitting on wet mud. A month later, the mud was salt crust. The transition was a collapse, not a cycle. Chapter 3: The Port Cities of Nowhere. If you go to Mauritania, you will find the ruins of Shingeti, or the lost stone structures in the middle of the Taklamakan Desert. Historians call them caravan outposts. That's a cover story. Look at the architecture. These ruins have massive stone docks. They have heavy iron and stone rings used for mooring large vessels. You do not build a 50-ton stone pier to tie up a camel. You build it for a ship. Why build a port in a place that supposedly hasn't seen water in 5 million years? You wouldn't. You build a port because there is an ocean right in front of you. These cities were built by sailors, not desert nomads. The Desert of Lop in China was described by Marco Polo as having a massive lake system. By the late 1880s, explorers found only ship graveyards and salt. The maps changed because the geography changed. We are taught that the Earth is a static, stable rock. The evidence says it is a volatile machine that can redesign itself in a week. Chapter 4: The Salt Evidence. The official narrative says the salt flats in the Sahara and Gobi are the result of millions of years of mineral buildup. This fails the chemistry test. If salt sits on the surface for millions of years, it undergoes specific crystalline degradation. It mixes with dust and organic matter. But the salt in these deserts is often 99% pure. It looks like it was deposited yesterday. In 1880, the water didn't just leave, it left behind millions of tons of pristine sea salt. This only happens during a rapid flash dry or a sudden drainage. If the water had evaporated over millions of years, the salt would be buried under miles of sediment. Instead, it's sitting right on top. Think about the salt mines of the Sahara. People have been digging salt there for centuries. They are digging up the remains of a recent ocean. If the desert was millions of years old, that salt would have washed away or been contaminated by soil cycles eons ago. The purity of the salt is the proof of the timeline. Chapter 5: The Memory Hole. The most dangerous part of this mystery isn't the missing water. It's the missing history. In the early 1800s, maps used in schools showed Lake Chad as a sea twice the size of France. By 1900, it was a puddle. The change happened so fast that cartographers couldn't keep up. They simply stopped printing the water and started printing the sand. Then, they changed the textbooks to say the sand had always been there. Why? Because if the public realizes the Earth can lose an ocean in 7 days, the economy collapses. Real estate values depend on the illusion of permanent geography. Your coastal city is only safe if you believe the ocean stays where it is told. The ships in the desert are a warning that the ocean doesn't follow orders. Imagine waking up tomorrow and the Atlantic is gone. The pier in Santa Monica is now a cliff overlooking a salt pit. This happened to the people living in the Gobi in 1880. They went from being fishermen to being nomads in a single generation. Write in the comments, do you think our modern maps will be useless in 100 years? Have you seen the salt flats yourself? Conclusion. The evidence is physical. We have 19th-century steamships sitting in the sand. We have port cities with no water. We have maps that show a blue world where we now see yellow. The million-year timeline is a mathematical construct designed to make you feel small and safe. It creates a buffer between you and the reality of a changing planet. But the ships don't care about timelines. They are made of iron and wood, and they are exactly where the water left them. I don't claim this is the ultimate truth. I'm just sharing reflections based on the physical anomalies that official history refuses to explain. Use your own eyes. Look at the maps. Look at the ships. The desert is not a tomb of ancient history. It is a fresh wound. The water went somewhere. The only question is when the drain will reverse, and where the water will decide to go next. Your city might be the next Gobi. Or the next Atlantis. History is not a straight line. It's a tide. And the tide just went out.